Tuesday, April 13th.
At 7 p.m. till 8:30, and the last dialogue we had was about the idea of resilience, and we had a speaker come and talk for a little bit and share, and he was so wise and funny and just amazing. And then we get to go into different breakout rooms on Zoom and just have some really cool, small conversations. And yeah, I walked away just feeling so blessed by it and just connected and inspired by everyone else's wisdom and experience. So it's a really great time. You get to meet faculty and other students and just other people in the UVA community and just Charlottesville community. And the one this upcoming month is going to be on the idea of inspiration. So come get inspired, and it's going to be a fun time. You can see Alice there. You'll probably see a couple other familiar vintage lunch faces. So
Thank you. Yeah, and it's facilitated almost all by students, so people that you know. And our Spark speaker is Carolyn Dillard, who's a friend of mine. She works for the university, and she's also part of the new group, the Descendants of the Enslaved Laborers at the University of Virginia. And she's descended from folks who lived at Castle Rock. And she's going to be coming to speak at Vintage too, so this is your chance to hear from her. And she's wonderful, so excited. We also have opened up invitations and applications for the Horizons Fellows and the Perkins Fellows. The Perkins Fellows program is for any, grade, any year. And it's a service learning kind of fellowship that goes through all of next year. So if you are a Perkins Fellow, you're matched with a community partner. Could be International Neighbors or Habitat for Humanity or Abundant Life, and you're matched with them, you do service with them, you're mentored by a leader in the organization, and then we gather the Perkins Fellows, together once a month for conversations, for readings, for sort of thinking about the theological and spiritual aspects of service, and for retreats and just food, always food. And then the Horizons Fellows are for fourth years. So I hope you will consider that if you're a third year. The Horizons Fellows are really focused on discernment, on calling, on career, on kind of whatever is coming next. And we match you with a mentor. It's a one-on-one mentorship from somebody in the community. And we sort of take you and your interests, whether it's personal or vocational or study interest, scholarly interest, and find the perfect match. So it's really fun to see these matches come up. And Horizons Fellows also go on retreats, day retreats, have monthly meals together. Are you a fellow? No. Am I missing a fellow here? All right, I did the pitch. But it's terrific. So I hope you'll all consider those opportunities. And tomorrow, I know you don't have time, I know you're really busy, but if you register, you get all this webinar stuff and you can watch it later. There's a student conference called Worked Up, Navigating Career and Calling After College. And some friends of mine in Wisconsin are putting it on at their ministry. It's really great. So I got to speak there once a couple of years ago, and I know these people, they're awesome. So registration's $10. I'm happy to cover it through Theological Horizons. And if you want to just sign up and then watch it all later, that's the beauty of Zoom, right? Okay, that is it. That is all. Any other announcements or random facts that you'd like to share? You got something, don't you?
no, I don't. You just gave me a weird look because of my platypus facts last time.
That was a good one. But I knew it was about platypus, but I can't remember what it was that you said.
So you can repeat it now.
What is it about platypuses?
Platypuses actually are venomous, and their venom makes them glow in the dark.
They glow in the dark.
And if I get bit by a platypus, do I glow in the dark?
Yeah, it's one way to find out.
Maybe the teeth marks.
Okay, would you please bring that answer back about for Haiti? Good.
Yeah, please research it. Send me the article.
Good. See, this is such a great learning opportunity, isn't it, guys? All right, I'm going to ring the chime, and we're going to take some time here to eat, continue eating, feel the sun on your face, the sweat running down your back. It's such a weird, good feeling. and just enjoy this moment. Be aware of God's presence with you and among us as we gather in this beautiful day and sun.
I actually have one more fact.
Oh, lay it on us.
So I learned yesterday in one of my program guys that melatonin is actually not addictive.
Melatonin is not addictive.
Not addictive. It's more of a reset to your biological clock. So when you take melatonin, people take it daily.
Yeah.
Of course, anything you take daily can get addictive, but you can take it once every other day, or for doing that for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And completely be off of it and sleep well. And melatonin is just a reset of your biological clock, so you can go to sleep at certain times and wake up in that specific hour. So I thought melatonin was addictive. I thought people who were on melatonin was taking a drug, but I was wrong.
What a relief. I'm glad, because I take it. Oh, that's so great. Thank you for sharing that. That was so good. And if anybody wants, well, I guess you have to get your own. I can't be dispensing herbs.
That explains it all.
He has a podcast.
You can send it to whoever desires to know more.
Good to know. Thank you. So sleep well, all of you. Hey, Max. If you need to grab a chair, grab a chair. All right. Good. Any other facts? I don't want to cut anybody off. All right. Let's begin. Amen. Well, you've heard this phrase when you're young and in college and talking about jobs. They say, find your passion. Has anybody been told that? What's your passion? Yeah. Well, that to me always made me feel really uncomfortable because I never knew my passion. It sounds like a lot to identify when you're young. And I think that's fine. You'll all be fine, whether you have a passion or not. You'll grow into it or find it. But this story is about a woman, but she was first a girl who was very, very clear about her passion from a very early age. And her name was Juana Inés de la Cruz. She was born in 1651 in Mexico, which was a colony of Spain at the time. Has any of you read her, in Spanish literature classes, or heard of her? Great. Okay. Born in 1651, when she was 3 years old, she convinced her sister to teach her how to read. And she heard at age 6 that there was a university in this faraway place called Mexico City. And so she wrote this later. She said, "I began to slay my poor mother with insistent and annoying pleas, begging her to dress me in men's clothes so that I could enter the university and study." Which I think is pretty clever. But her mother did not, in fact, dress her in boys' clothes and send her at 6 years old to the university. So she was stuck in this little town, which in the Aztec language literally means the middle of nowhere. She was fortunate enough to have a grandfather who had a large library. He had books of literature, science, philosophy, theology, languages. And by the age of, I think, about 12, she had read every single book in his library, and she was starting to get antsy. She was so committed to learning that she gave up a couple things. There's a quote in which she says, "I would abstain from eating cheese because I heard tell that it made people stupid, and the desire to learn was stronger for me than the desire to eat." So that's some sacrifice right there. She gave up the cheese. If there was something she was trying to master and she couldn't master it, and she would have this habit of cutting off her beautiful curls as a way of punishing her, like her head, for not learning the stuff that she was trying to learn. So she was like a true intellectual person. But the problem was she lived in Mexico in the 17th century. The authorities were male. They were very conservative, traditional. They were Spanish colonialists, and she was a nobody from nowhere. She was not only nobody, her birth was not even recorded in the church, in the registry, because she was illegitimate. Her father was a Spanish military person. Her mother was an indigenous woman. They were not married. So she was literally off the books. But she had a desire to get out of there and to get to Mexico City. So she came up with a plan, which was to join the court, the royal court. And she found a way to become a lady in waiting in the court of the viceroy and the vicereine. They were a man and a woman married who were basically the sovereign representatives of Spain in Mexico. So she got into the court, the royal court, which was a good move, because she started to write poetry and plays, and she knew that the viceroy and the vicereine loved literature. So she started writing poems about the beauty and cleverness of the vicereine. So all that flattery definitely got her in good with her lady, or madam, or whatever, la senora, or whatever. Now, the viceroy, the man, noticed this little girl, and she was a young teenager at that point. So he saw an opportunity for amusement, and he gathered 40 men from across his little kingdom. They were mathematicians and philosophers and scholars, and he got 40 of them, and the story goes that he lined them all up and brought in Juana Inés, and he had this like battle of the brains. And they quizzed her, they asked her all kinds of questions on all these different subjects, and she crushed it. And so I love that. She outwitted them, she charmed them, and this is what she said afterwards. I think this gives you a flavor for her personality. Of all my country, she said, I was a venerated figure, one of those idols that inspire the general applause. So things were going pretty well. But she was such an intellectual, and she said, I do not value treasures or riches. It is always gives me more pleasure to put wealth in my thought than to put thought into my wealth. But what she really wanted was to study undisturbed. And as a member of the court, she had a lot of parties she had to go to, and she was a lady in waiting, so she had to curl hair or dress the lady or whatever. And I don't think that was going to last that long, because she couldn't get married either. She had no dowry. Remember, she wasn't legitimate. She had no resources. So her future in society was pretty much doomed. And even if she had an option to be married, that was not her plan at all. So the royal court, that time was ending. She couldn't get married. She had these sketchy credentials. So she was left with really only one option, which was to become a what? A nun, right. And of course, today for us, I don't know. I've met some nuns, but I can't say I really have many personal interactions with nuns. Do you? So I was looking at the statistics, and right now in the United States, they say there are about 1,200 women who are preparing for the religious life as nuns. I don't know if that's right. But in Mexico City, it was quite a thing at the time. In Mexico City, in her lifetime, there were 16 convents in the year 1650. 16 convents, and they were filled with daughters of society, people who had connections, and she had connections. She'd been hanging out with the right people. They were cloistered, so they were contained, and they were supervised by, of course, men, the male clergy, the priests. But in a lot of ways, they were just these little universes of women and of feminine power. So she says this, and we'll read this again in the reading, but she said, I took the veil, although I knew I would find in the religious life many things that would be quite opposed to my character, but it would, given my absolute unwillingness to enter into marriage, be the least unfitting and the most decent state I could choose. So it's kind of the least worst thing. So, yeah.
Could anyone become a nun, or did you have to have something?
I don't think anybody could just become a nun. And that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. I do know that when you read about the story of like Hildegard von Bingen, who was in Germany, basically your family had to pay a dowry in to be a nun. So, because you were marrying Christ, so of course you had to bring the money to support the institution. I know there's a logic there. So I don't really know the circumstances of how she did it. That's a really good question. But I think, for all the hype about her not being legitimate and all that, she clearly had found resources to get in there. So, but I think if you were like a servant in a household, you couldn't just say, this isn't for me, I'm going to go be a nun. It was way more difficult than that. So there was a lot of class and hierarchy involved. Yeah. I'd love to know more, though. I'll look into it. So she went into this convent, San Jaramillo, which in her cell, she had 2 floors. She had a view of the Valley of Mexico. She had private living quarters, servants, a kitchen, a bath, and a parlor. So it's kind of not what I thought when I thought of nuns. There was definitely some privilege here, or at least some comfort. So she had her own space, a place to be independent and to foster what she called her inclination to study. She had to participate in prayers every day. The nuns had a rhythm of prayers throughout the day. She had a job. She was basically the accountant of the convent because she was really good at math. And she began to collect books, secular books, religious books. She collected musical instruments. She collected scientific instruments. And as a very young woman, she had the largest library in all of Mexico in her convent with her. She began to write while she was there. She wrote religious plays, secular plays, verses for dance tunes, sacred poems, love poems, comedies, philosophy. She wrote an essay on theology. She wrote an autobiographical defense of the right of women to study. And she was really this incredible erudite woman. And even though she couldn't leave the convent, her work got out there into the world. And it traveled to Europe. And she was very, very well known as this writer. And even though she couldn't go out, people could come into the convent. And so the way I've seen it described is she had like the bars between her and the parlor, but people could come and sit for a salon type of situation into her parlor and debate theology or read poems or act out plays. I mean, she had this whole little literary scene going on right there in her cell. So in this way, she developed her life of learning and her life of literature and of knowledge. So let's take a look here at the first reading. Actually, let's go to the second reading. The second reading, number 2 on the handout. A little background. So, hey MD, there's food there too. Oh yeah. This was colonial Mexico, and the Spanish Inquisition was in force in Mexico, just as it was in Spain. And so when I'm looking through her book, like her readings, sort of trying to look for something theological, something spiritual, something about God, because that's what we read when we come together. And it's kind of hard to find anything that's sort of directly confessional and devotional. I mean, it's in there. But I think this passage really talks about her motivations, and also is kind of a interesting take on why she does what she does and why she writes what she writes. And I think she's writing for an audience too, so you can bear that in mind. All right, here you go. I'm going to read it and then we're going to talk about it. In the opinion of the very people who slander me for writing, I am under no obligation to be learned, nor do I possess the capacity never to err. In truth, I have never written except when pressured and forced to, and only then to please others. And even then, not without enjoyment, but with actual repugnance, because I have never thought of myself as possessing the natural intelligence and educational background required of a writer, beyond a handful of superficial sophistries. Let such things be left to those who understand them. I want no trouble with the holy office. I am ignorant, and I shudder to think that I might utter some disreputable proposition or distort the proper understanding of some passage or other. My purpose in studying is not to write, much less to teach. This would be overbearing pride in my case, but simply to see whether studying makes me less ignorant. This is my reply, and these are my feelings. God, in his goodness, has favored me with a great love of truth. From my first glimmers of reason, my inclination to letters was of such power and vehemence that neither the reprimands of others, and I have received many, nor my own considerations, and there have been not a few of those, have succeeded in making me abandon this natural impulse which God has implanted in me. Only God's majesty knows why and wherefore, and his majesty also knows that I have prayed to God to extinguish the light of my mind, only leaving sufficient to keep God's law. Since any more is overmuch, so some say, in a woman, and there are even those who say it is harmful. His majesty also knows that, not succeeding in these, I have tried to bury my name along with my mind and sacrifice it to God alone who gave it to me. And that this was precisely my motivation in taking the veil, even though the exercises and shared life which a community entails were repellent to the independence and tranquility which my inclination to study needed. And once in the community, the Lord God knows how hard I tried to conceal my name. I became a nun because, although I knew that that way of life involved much that was repellent to my nature, I refer to its incidental, not its central aspects. Nevertheless, given my total disinclination to marriage, it was the least unreasonable and most becoming choice I could make to assure my ardently desired salvation. By the grace of God, I entered upon the life I now pursue so unworthily. I thought I was escaping from myself, but alas for me, I had brought myself along. In this propensity, I brought my greatest enemy, given me by heaven, whether a boon or a punishment I cannot decide. For far from dying out or being hindered by all the exercises religion entails, it exploded like gunpowder. And then Latin, privation arouses the appetite. Does anybody read Latin here? Max, you can read. No? Then I'll try it because nobody knows. Privatio esta causa appetitos. I think that's pretty good. Privation arouses the appetite, had its confirmation in me. I will say that I tried to uplift my study as much as I could and direct it to serving God, since the goal I aspired to was the study of theology. All right, so let's pause. What do you think you hear about Juana Inés, her understanding of herself, maybe her understanding of God, of society, of her circumstance? What are you hearing in this?
That her intellectual pursuit is divine by nature, and at the end it sort of says like her goal is the study of theology, but we know that she's not sitting there reading and just writing about just the Bible, but she's studying everything and becoming a Renaissance woman and pursuing
Yeah. Thank you. It's pretty strong in there. What is you thinking? Sorry about I don't know what it is about yard work. It always happens on Fridays. Yeah.
It's interesting to me the tie between deprivation and society. That's like deprivation in society is trumped by what God provides, in this case through her desires and her connections. And then she thinks that A, like God trumps society, and B, that deprivation is not something that she associates God with at all. And I think that's true in many areas of life. He fulfills our desires and leads them. Not exactly how we think, but it definitely doesn't just leave us like hanging or like
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think something else I see is like the conflict between herself and God, because she talks a lot about, oh, but I brought myself along, or like this enemy that I've brought along, and I think like I see a big conflict between her desire and seeking of the truth and knowledge, and like her living for Christ, which I don't think I agree with. I think that you can have a desire to seek truth, a desire to see more about the world, and scientifically, but also still have a desire to know God and have a relationship with Him. But I feel like in this day and age, maybe, or even in her own heart, she feels like those are at ends. For her to fully seek God, she has to be able to trust that which she can't understand. But the desire that she has to understand everything is in conflict with that.
Yeah, there's definitely tension in here, isn't there? And I love that. I mean, it's so poignant when she says, basically, you know, the cliche, wherever you go, there you are. Like, I think she said it first. What else are you thinking?
I really love this strong start to instruction. And I can think of a couple of professors I'd like to say I am under no obligation to do what you do, because the capacity never refers to. But that's so good. That's so I really love that to be her.
Yeah. And she's like, I want no trouble with the Holy Office. Like, you priests, like, I leave the theology to you. Well,
I think it's also funny because I think that's her way of articulating her humility, even though it's not like a servant's heart kind of humility that I feel like we always associate with it, but it's like her explaining that she understands like maybe where she came from, that she doesn't have the same background as everyone else, and then is kind of pushing herself, I guess, and in that she has humility, knowing that like she has no obligation to be thought of as intelligent.
Yeah, it's like that strong humility. It's sort of what you don't expect. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah, and her fire, like she's so feisty, and there's so many aspects to her, I think, coming through.
I think also we're told a lot like not to put your self-worth and self-value in things like grades and career, and then root yourself instead in God. And I think that I like that she kind of combines the two of those things. Like you can be rooted in God and still be intellectually passionate and like have a fire for those things that maybe society tells you aren't necessarily church related or traditional, but through God and through your own religious experience, you realize that it is empowering and it's okay to be empowered in those things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that adds a lot. Well, I'll tell you some more of her story and then we'll read some more of her words. So, people call her the first woman, the first female theologian of the Americas, which I think is cool. And her theology is described as a theology of literary theology, a theology of God's beauty, because she's writing literature. You know, she's sort of using these other modes of theology, so kind of a broader view of theology and writing about God and the spiritual life and the deeper life. She has a passage here in which she wrote it on the feast day of St. Catherine of Alexandria, And so for her, she wrote it in 1691. And I brought this passage because she has her own role model, Juana Inés, in this older saint. So, we're sitting here looking back at Juana Inés, and then she's looking further back to Saint Catherine, who lived in Egypt during the 3rd century. And Saint Catherine, I don't know if you've ever heard her story. Actually, she got taken off the Catholic saint list. I'm not Catholic, but I follow these things because I'm into it. She was taken off the list because apparently there's not enough historical evidence that she lived. But anyway, let's just put that aside for now. There are many churches called St. Catherine throughout Europe. It was like the most popular saint, apparently in the Middle Ages. But anyway, there are always issues. But anyway, St. Catherine was a feisty young girl. She was a very privileged, wealthy young woman. And when it came time to get married, she refused to get married because she wanted to be the bride of Christ. She wanted to live a religious life. So she refused the society, she refused her family, and of course she was martyred in the ways of these saints, tragically. But this is what Juana Inés writes about Catherine. There was once a girl, you'll see who I mean, whose years had reached the age of 18. Now, I don't think this rhymes. It rhymes in English, so I don't know how they got it from Spanish. Right? So I don't know. I know that's a pride. I'm like, wait a minute. But we're just going to go with it, okay?
It was so good that her rhyming would work in any language.
Rhymes in every language.
Thought of every possible.
Right. Oh boy. Okay. Again, I'm like sharing way too much. There was once a girl, you'll see who I mean, whose years had reached the age of 18. If you just hutch up my meaning you'd glean, this girl, don't ask how, 'cause here words fail, knew a lot, so they say, though she was female. If you just hush up, you'd hear my tale. Now people are always saying, that all girls can spin and sew. If you just hush up and not fuss so. But her, she could argue wit grown men and win, so kids couldn't lick her to save their skin. If you just hush up and not butt in. The makings of her sainthood was in her, they say. Even knowing so much didn't get her in her way. If you just hush up and let me say. Now when word reached old Nick, who didn't shut an eye, she's so holy and smart, he'd make like he'd die. If you just hush up, I'll tell you why. Because there's one thing drives the devil up a tree. It's hearing of a woman who's smarter than he. If you just hush up and let me be. So what does he do? Goes and urges a king to tempt her in her faith and demand she give in. If you just keep still and not butt in. Her terrible threats didn't make a dent. She would sooner die than ever relent. If you just hush up and let me end. No more questions now, 'cause all I can say is that Catherine will live forever and a day. You needn't hush up. I've had my say. So I think we need maybe a chorus in the back for that. So there is Catherine of Alexandria who understood Juana Inés. But the final chapter of her story is really disturbing and leaves a lot of questions open. So I'll tell you what I know, and then we can think about it. We know that after years of following God's call, expressing this gift of the scholarly, artistic, intellectual life, flourishing in knowledge, in renown, Juana Inés abruptly takes a vow of silence. She renounces her public life. She goes completely silent. She gives away all her books, her treasures, her scientific instruments. There's a letter, her final letter, renouncing her public life. She wrote in her own blood. So we know that there was the Spanish Inquisition. There was a lot of pressure from the church authorities. There were some back and forth essays and letters and conflict around her controversy. So most people say it was just the pressure of people in authority, men in authority, who just insisted that she stop and stripped her of all of her access and her work. Now, some people say that she may have had some other sort of calling. maybe a calling to contemplation and solitude for a time, and that maybe she would have come back to her intellectual work. But she lived for 2 years after that in the convent, and she died of illness when it was the plague. She was caring for other nurses, other nuns, and she died at that time. So we never know really what that was all about. But most people in the common telling is that she was shut down and silenced by the authorities. And her last words were, or in her last phrases, she said, "If my intellect is my own, why must I always find it so keen to harm me?" Really tragic. So let's read this final passage from her, which she wrote late in her life. "So then," this is the fourth reading, "so then, unmaker of all my dear illusions, now you have arrived here at the very last. And since you are here in your own person, I know for certain that the end has come to pass. You have compelled my loss of everything, and that is not all either. I now believe that the price I paid for receiving this advisement could even be considered somewhat cheap. No longer now will you go envying love, those flattering and beguiling joys no longer yours, this being a rigorous lesson in disabusement and the risk of further self-deceptions being slight. I can now give up all my watching and waiting, and this serves me as a secure consolation. I find it to be, in addition, an alleviation to the need of having to seek remediation. In this same way, and in this very loss, I have found here something of a palliation. One finds that when the treasure has been forfeit, the fear of forfeiture is likewise lost. Having been left with nothing left to lose, I am now in a calmer situation. The traveler, finding herself already denuded, has no more fear of finding herself accosted. But neither does this self-same liberty serve me as any reliable advantage, and it should soon prove to be a detriment if I should take it for yet another acquisition. I no longer need the need for carefulness, and of assets which tend to be at best uncertain, and I am determined that even this soul's disposition be considered only as yet another dispossession. So my question to you is, what questions are you asking right now?
I'm wondering what she lost, like when it talks about the treasure, like one finds that when the treasure has been forfeit, the fear of forfeiture is likewise lost. So what did she treasure that she lost? Was it like the education or like intellect that she like had held so highly? So yeah, was it like you were talking about outside forces that told her like she could no longer study? And because of that, once that love was gone, she had nothing left to.
Yeah.
She almost sounds like she has nothing left to live for.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Right. What did she lose?
Although on the flip side, it had these echoes of freedom. Like, now that I'm not worrying about losing this, then I don't know, then it's not weighing on me anymore.
Yeah.
I definitely think about that a lot. Like, I'm just looking at that, which is like probably $5 total. But like, just thinking about the things that we have in like, yeah, even our mind, like Alice was saying, or our health, or whatever it is, that like, am I really willing to lose this? And it seems like almost anything I have, I'm like trying to hold on to. But so that just struck the chord, I guess.
Yeah. Did she experience this as freedom? Yeah. What else are you wondering?
So who's the unmaker of all my dear illusions?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure who the unmaker is. If it's God, if it's some character that I don't know, I can't remember the context of this, so who the audience is. Who do you think it is, since we can guess?
What was this kind of drawn from? What kind of?
Yeah, it's a poem. It's like in,
From journals or letters?
I think it's a poem that she wrote.
Could it be herself?
Could it be herself?
I think even the terminology of unmaker of all my dear it sounds like something that's hurt, like something that like destroyed her dreams. So I don't know. I feel like it could be her knowledge, but I also feel like it's her sense of self. Like she talked a lot about her nature.
Yeah.
She talked a lot about like who she was in this, and if she's lost that like that nature, she doesn't know who she is anymore. I feel like that could be.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's like it's an identity crisis, right? Who is she? Well, okay, here's my question for you. All right, so this young girl, 17th century Mexico, is given this gift, and she believes that she's been given the gift by God. And for those of us who see the world and experience through a spiritual lens and think about God as one who gives gifts, and the Bible story is, a creation God. So she's given this amazing gift, but like there's nothing in her situation that ultimately really allows her to use it, or she's always limited. She always suffers for it. Like, what do we think about those people, and that could be you too, who receive this incredible gift and yet can't express it for whatever reason, whether it's a reason of poverty or gender or race or historical circumstance. I mean, how many circumstances can we think of where the people who had gifts were never expressed them? Like, how do we think about that? What are some ways of entering into that question?
Yeah, I think like the first thing that comes to our mind is like the Bible verse where it talks about like a master giving his 3 servants like a certain amount of money, and he wants them to go reap what they've sown, like at least reap what he's sown. And it reminds me of that third servant. He like just gave the master back his money. He was nothing. And it's like, much is given, much is taken away, much responsibility is given, but there's a lot of obstacles in that way. And I think a lot of the time when someone is giving so much and they can make such an influence, other people get jealous. There's just so much that people desire from and envy from. Like even if she said like no longer will you go envying love. Like no longer will you go envying the love that I have. Like what people desire from other people want to take it. Like people want to make that an obstacle. And so I think like for a lot of the times when people have so much to give, so many people desire that for all for themselves, that have envy towards that. And so a lot of obstacles are created in that same space.
So the human experience brings that dynamic, yeah.
I think through the spiritual lens, if you're looking at more liberty and more like ability to express that, but it's grace that anyone has a gift at all, and that in the end, at the end of the day, it's all about him and how it reflects back on God. And at the end of the day, we're talking about her, which means it's still, that grace was still given to us, and we're able to, glorify God because of it.
Yeah.
But it's really not about us. And I think a lot of times we can make it about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where my mind goes with this story. Is like, why? Like she had all this, and then she wrote her name in blood and died. It's just so tragic. So that's a really different perspective, right? Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and I'm curious to know what you will take with you from this story and these readings. If you have any phrase or word you'd like to offer, what would it be? Just shout it out.
conversation reminded me of how, like, a lot of kids in that system are, their gifts from God are not nourished, and people who go through hard times in their life that might end up in the criminal justice system or might be kind of taken out of their school systems aren't given that opportunity to nourish that intellect and nourish that gift. And so I guess, like, kind of the opposite lens of what you were saying, like, there are still very many ways that we need to work as Christians to help people be able to nourish their gifts. Because there's a lot of people who aren't.
Yeah. That just brings it right up to today, right? Like, how are we freeing people and enabling people, equipping people to express? Yeah. Thank you.
I think God ultimately puts our passions and likes and dislikes within us for a reason. And so I think that Juana's intellect was for a reason. The fact that we're able to read these things and her work spread across the world. And so I think that our desires don't go against God and what His ultimate purpose for us is.
Yeah. To understand our desires as in alignment with what God made us for.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a big one. Well, I'm really happy that we got to meet this sister, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz together. And I hope you'll sort of think about, as you meet people or even meet yourself, like what you think about these questions that have come up, like how you might see the gifts of people around you that maybe are not being expressed or not enabled or they don't have space, or, I think there are so many ways that we can take her story into our lives and make it our own. And again, I think because, we're telling her story means that in many ways she did fulfill her purpose. So that's beautiful. Well, may the Lord Christ go with you wherever He may send you. May He guide you through the wilderness and guide you through the storm. May He bring you home rejoicing at the wonders He has shown you. May He bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Amen. Next Friday is Good Friday, so we're going to read poetry and scripture together and have a special Good Friday reflection together, hopefully in more sunshine. So, hey Zoe. Oh, Zoe's going to make an announcement.
Oh, hi, I'm Zoe.
This is
I'm talking about the Perkins House and Perkins Fellows today. For all of you who don't know, the Perkins Fellows is a program that basically brings two people together who are already serving in the community in different ways, whether you're regardless of how you're volunteering. It's a group of us who come together and kind of connect the work we do in the community to scripture and activism and faith. And we usually meet once a month and discuss and have good meetings and good meals together. It's pretty chill. And so if you are interested in being involved in the Perkins Fellows, highly recommend you can talk to me or reach out to Karen and put you in touch with me. Also, for anyone looking for housing, another connected program to that is the Perkins House, where we go even deeper into learning how to live in community and serve in community together. So that is also open. So if anyone's interested in that kind of work, let me know. It's awesome. I've been doing it for 3 years. That's it.
Thanks, Zoe. I love the drive-by, the run-through. Yeah, it was perfect timing. So, Perkins House, Perkins Fellows. Thanks. And Zoe, you're such a great poster child for all of those things. Yep. Take some food while you're here. I'm just Chipotle.
I will. Don't worry.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thanks, y'all. Be well. Eat more food.
Thank you.
Thanks.